Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in for the last of our Sunday Q&A series. We are honored tonight to be joined by our Attorney General, Mark Herring. He has a long history of government service here in Virginia at the local level, in the General Assembly, and then also statewide. So I'm so excited to have a chance for all of you to meet him here tonight. Sir, how are you?
Doing very well, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. And to everyone, hello. It is wonderful to be able to have this conversation. And for the last 7+ years, it has been an honor and privilege for me to serve you and all Virginians as your Attorney General. And I'm asking for your support again this year as Attorney General. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Well, me too. You have a long history of government service and a lot of good experience to share. And so I'm excited for all of our constituents here in Charlottesville and those who are tuning in from afar to have a chance to get to know you. In case you're joining us for the first time, just a little bit of housekeeping. There are 2 places for you to watch tonight, on YouTube and on Facebook, and there are chats in both of those formats. So if you have a question, please drop it in there. We want to be talking about the things that are most important to you. I will get us going by asking just a few brief warm-up questions so that we can start to get to know our guest tonight. But then we want to turn it over to you and talk about what you're most excited to see from your next Attorney General. Let me just first give you a chance to introduce yourself a little bit more, sir, and talk to us about how you came to public service, because you've been in elected office now for a while, but there's a very interesting road that got you there from the beginning. So, tell us about how you came to this work.
Sure. Well, it's not something that ever I've thought about doing until I got into it. But just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a husband and a father. My wife, Laura, and I have raised 2 children in Loudoun County, where I grew up. And so she and I had talked about going back to my hometown where I grew up after college and law school. And we married in between my 2nd and 3rd year of law school, and she was up for that. So we did. And, and again, it was not anything that we planned on. I was just, kind of going through life, and we were as a family. And right about the time our oldest was about to start school, the schools in Loudoun were way overcrowded. I mean, the trailers filled the parking lots. And I was raised by a single mom, and one of the things that she really instilled in me when I was growing up was, if you see a problem in your community, you've got a responsibility to try to fix it and do something about it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. And so I started thinking, well, okay, how can I relieve this overcrowding problem in our schools? And I thought, well, if I ran for the Board of Supervisors and won, and I could get 4 others to go along with me and make school construction a priority and alleviating the overcrowding, we could do it. And interesting thing, back then, it was a pretty Republican area at the time, and so some people thought I would run as an independent, but I told them, because they didn't think a Democrat could win in Loudoun County then, and I said, well, I have to be true to myself. I'm a Democrat, and so I'm not going to run as something else. And by the way, I think you're wrong. I think a Democrat can win, and to everyone's shock and surprise, I did. And I think in that 4-year period, we built or funded 16 new schools to address the overcrowding problem and fix it. And so, yeah, that's how I got started. And I guess you could say I'm also very much about red to blue. So when I first ran, that was a red to blue seat when I won, and did the same when I was elected to the Senate, and same as Attorney General.
Well, I think it's sort of rare sometimes for us to have statewide officials who come out first out of local government. A lot of people come through the legislature. You've also served in Richmond. Can you talk to us about how that experience serving in local government and then also in the legislature has affected your perspective as a statewide official?
Sure. Well, I mean, the job I have right now, I absolutely love, and I love practicing law. I love public policy, but most of all, I love helping people. And when you're the Attorney General, you get to do that every minute you're awake. But I could also honestly say that serving my community as a county supervisor was also one of the most fulfilling things that I've done, and to really be plugged into the community at that local level. I just really liked serving my community, helping people in the neighborhoods around Leesburg where I lived, and so that's kind of how I approached it. Was it was something to help people, and you could really see in a tangible way the work that you were doing. So whether it's like getting a park opened or making an intersection safer, it's all about helping people. And so that's really, I'd say that experience really informs my work as Attorney General in that way, that the job is about serving our community, or as Attorney General, the state. And so I bring that perspective because that really gets to part of the new vision that I have brought to the job as Attorney General, which is, to really use the law as a way to help people, and to make sure the powers of the office are always on the side of the people, and looking at anything I could do to fix problems that I see around the state.
Well, it would be great to have you talk a little bit about the really tangible ways that you've had a chance to fix problems that affect everyday Virginians' lives. I know when you're at the local government level, people can feel those tangible effects. They notice if the pothole doesn't get fixed, or if there aren't enough trees on the block or aren't enough seats in the classrooms. But sometimes at the statewide level, we deal with those bigger things. Can you talk to us, as you think about your last 2 terms as Attorney General? What are the accomplishments that you're proudest of that you think Virginians can really feel in their daily lives?
Well, I really think, in a broad sense, one of the things that I am most proud of is really just bringing a different vision to the job. The reason I ran is I saw how the powers of the office had been misused. My predecessor, for example, used it to marginalize LGBTQ Virginians and attack the environment, and just I felt like it had been misused. And I thought we needed to have an Attorney General who put the powers of the office on the side of the people, because the Attorney General is really the people's lawyer. That's how I view it. And so, some of those things, even though it's a changing of vision, but it has had an immediate impact on Virginians. So a couple of weeks into my first term as a new Attorney General, I went into court and said, no, we are not going to defend a discriminatory ban on marriage for same-sex couples. We are going to come in on the side of marriage equality. And it was not necessarily popular at the time, but it was the right thing to do to help our fellow Virginians. And we won. And now we have some of the strongest protections for the LGBTQ Virginians in the entire South. Ending the rape kit backlog. This is something that I have heard from so many survivors, how much it has helped them, even in situations where maybe their perpetrator was identified, brought to justice. Even in those situations, just knowing that the Commonwealth, their Attorney General was doing this, really helped them pursue justice and be on a path of healing and recovery. Going in and something else that I think was really significant early on, standing up for our immigrant communities and new Virginians, and finding a way for Dreamers to get an equal education and in-state tuition in Virginia. Again, wasn't necessarily popular at the time, but my feeling is, I worked really hard to get the job. What good does it do if you feel like you're constrained by politics? I just felt like, you don't know what the future holds, so you got a 4-year term, make the most of it. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 7+ years, is making the most of the opportunity to help Virginians. Another one that really had a big impact was standing up against the Muslim ban. And as soon as I was reading it on my phone, the president's Trump's executive order, and I was like, as I was reading, it's like, well, this is the Muslim ban he promised us during the campaign. And so I went to Dulles Airport, because I wanted to speak out against it. And then I went to federal court in Alexandria and got the country's first preliminary injunction against it. And I heard from so many Virginians, yes, certainly a lot of them were Muslim, but other minority communities also felt threatened by this. And so many of them told me they couldn't recognize what their federal government was doing, but they felt they were home in Virginia because of what we did. And I'll never forget, there was a George Mason student who had been, I guess you could say, stranded. She was from Libya and was flying back to school at George Mason. And when she was in Turkey at a layover, found out that she couldn't get on the plane. And so we worked really hard to get her back. And I remember meeting her at the airport at Dulles when we finally were able to get some changes made quickly, and she was able to come back to George Mason. I remember meeting her at the airport, and she was so poised, and she said, this is something I might have expected from my home country, but never the United States. And so, sometimes these things, in a way, they can, be, the ideals of justice and equality seem abstract, but they actually have, the more you move toward equality and justice, you're actually helping people and you're making their lives better. So all of those things that I've talked about, definitely they had a direct impact on Virginians. And
yes, they did. It seems like a lot of times early in your career, you were really on offense in Virginia politics, helping to be a part of turning Loudoun County blue and then getting Democrats into statewide office and really pushing a lot of those issues like gay rights long before the General Assembly was ready to get there. And then over the last 4 years, the Attorney General's office in a lot of ways has been on defense, defending us from DC, because we've had these assaults from the federal government coming. And while the General Assembly was finally catching up and we were able to put into law a lot of the good values that you've been fighting for in the courts, like the Virginia Values Act, things that had been long overdue for the Commonwealth, I would love to hear you talk about what the shift in our nation's capital has meant for you and your office, going from having a president who was an active threat on a day-to-day basis to the kind of work that you were trying to do, to now having a Biden administration who can really be a partner. What does that mean for you in your office?
It's huge. So much of the work of the last 4 years was literally protecting our democracy and pushing back against the worst impulses of the Trump agenda. And whether it was going in and protecting the Muslim community from the ban, or whether it was going to court to defend the Affordable Care Act, which I've done now twice in the Supreme Court. There was just a constant, it seemed like I'd have to, every day it seemed like there was something. And so, we fought a lot of lawsuits to stop some of the worst of the Trump agenda. And now to have a friend in the White House, it's going to be so much, provide so many more opportunities to be proactive in helping people. I can give you a few examples. So under a Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions Department of Justice, they totally shut down what are called pattern and practice investigations of police departments that have been engaged in systematic unconstitutional policing. That was a tool that Congress gave the U.S. Department of Justice following the Rodney King beating in Los Angeles. And those pattern and practice investigations did a lot to clean up some bad practices in different departments around the country, but they just stopped doing it. So last summer, I asked the General Assembly, asked you all for authority for our office to do them in Virginia, because the US DOJ wasn't doing them anymore. Well, now that we have a Merrick Garland Department of Justice, I feel like if we need to do a pattern and practice investigation in Virginia, we can do it in partnership with U.S. Department of Justice. That's one example. But there are going to be so many opportunities to work together. There are opportunities for gun violence reduction, going into communities, interrupting the cycle of violence. There's just going to be so many opportunities to work together, and we won't have to spend all of the energy and resources to thwarting bad things from happening, and instead can redirect those resources into doing things in a positive and a proactive kind of way.
Well, that's perhaps a great segue to our first question from the audience. You started talking about criminal justice and particularly police accountability. I know that has been such a priority topic for our constituents here in the Charlottesville area, but of course around Virginia. And we made some good steps on that in the General Assembly special session, but of course there's no shortage of good work to be done. Joe here was wondering what the Attorney General's office can do to work with the governor and the General Assembly to establish uniform statewide data collection for our state and local law enforcement to ensure that we can really monitor racially disparate policing in all of our communities and work to stop it.
Yeah, so that's, you're right about the work that's been done. The General Assembly last year and this session has made tremendous strides in changing policing. We know that communities of color, Black Virginians, are policed differently, and it needs to stop. It's well known, it's documented, and it needs to stop. There is a requirement now for law enforcement to maintain that data, so that if there are patterns where there's disparate enforcement, we will know it and we'll see the data. So that's something that is going to be happening. And I will absolutely work with the governor and make sure that if there is a department that's not following the law in that regard, I will enforce it and make sure that they do. But there's a lot still to be done. That's one part of policing reform, but we also, we have a mass incarceration problem in this country, and the weight of that system falls disproportionately on Black people in America, and it needs to change. One way we can change it is not just make the system more fair, whether it's reforming cash bail or ending our system of cash bail, but also on the front end, like reducing not everything has to be a crime. So like the marijuana decriminalization and now hopefully legalization. 2 years ago, nobody was talking about it. To the extent they were saying, well, Virginia's not ever going to get around to this. And I've just seen so many people's futures held back because of an arrest for small possession of marijuana charge. And in Virginia, that stays with you forever and can really limit your future opportunities. And so I called for major reform of our cannabis laws and decriminalization first, but also legalization and then addressing past convictions. And I'm pleased to say that once I did that, that really got the momentum going. And now we have decriminalization. Hopefully we will have legalization soon. And that will make a real difference. So part of it is reforming policing and making the criminal justice system more fair and more just. But it's also on the front end of things like decriminalization, because that has been such a major on-ramp for Black men into jails and prisons.
Yeah, we know that drug convictions account for, I think, close to half of the new admissions to our jails system in Virginia. That was what was a priority of mine in the session this year that didn't happen to move. I carried a bill that would have eliminated felony penalties for simple possession of all Schedule 1 to 4 substances. So you couldn't be put in jail for more than a year. You could still have a misdemeanor, but the General Assembly decided we weren't quite ready to take that step, and so that'll be a crime commission study in the coming year. But part of the goal being to assess the broader network of substance abuse resources that we have, so that we can be shifting those resources, like you were saying, out of that system of punishment and into one of support and rehabilitation.
And something else that's really important for folks to know is we also now just got passed a record expungement law, and I was proud to work with the majority leader, Chanel Herring, on that. And so now there's a path. Virginia, right now, until this law becomes effective, is probably one of the few, it's probably one of the least forgiving states when it comes to a conviction, criminal conviction. And now we've gone from kind of back of the pack to a national leader when somebody has made a mistake, they've served their sentence, and have shown through a period of time that they are deserving of a second chance. They should get it, and many will now as a result of this new law.
Absolutely. I know when I talked to formerly incarcerated constituents, that was always their top priority, and that the Clean Slate Act will mean really a fresh start for so many people in housing and employment and credit and everything. So that's a real example of something that will matter for a lot of real people's lives. Another question that we have here in the chat, and please, folks who are just tuning in, keep them coming. We will get to your question eventually. Mike, who I know is one of our really active organizers in Moms Demand in our local chapter here, would love to hear you talk about what the future of gun violence prevention looks like in Virginia, because we have made a lot of really important progress in the last couple years. What would you like to see next?
We have made a lot of progress, and this is something that I have fought for and made it a part of my first campaign for Attorney General, and continued to take on the gun lobby, yes, even in Virginia. And Virginians came in and supported me because of it. Now with new leadership in the General Assembly, we've gotten some really important laws passed. So we've gotten expanded background checks. We've gotten a 1 gun a month law reinstated, red flag law. Now the gun lobby didn't go away. They did go to court. So we are defending against those legal challenges right now, and we are going to win. But there's still more work to be done. And I also think, assault weapons, like those were made for war and not for our streets. And there's no reason why somebody should be having an assault weapon in Virginia. So I think something like that is probably should be up for discussion. And I also think in terms of violence prevention, it can be looked at also as a public health issue. And one of the things that I've done as Attorney General is to support some priority areas with violence interruption programs. And so there's a lot there to be done.
I would love to keep talking with you about that, as sometimes after this meeting, because we have had an uptick in gun violence in our community in the last year, like a lot of folks had during all of the difficulties of COVID and the economic lockdown. But we have also had some really tremendous leaders in a local organization called the Buck Squad, which has stood up to do that kind of violence interruption in a very community rooted way. And so we would love to work with other communities who have had success in programs like that and try to scale and support it at the level it deserves. Because like you said, there's only so much that we can do to reduce gun violence by trying to regulate the weapons themselves. Some of it is about stopping those situations before they spiral out of control. And we're at the stage now where we need to figure out how to institutionalize those really good local upstarts.
Yeah, and studies show that if you have been exposed to violence, if you're a witness to it or you've experienced it yourself, that you are at very high risk of further violence, either being committed against you or you becoming a perpetrator within like 60 days. So like within that 2-month period, you are at very high risk of violence. And so if we have people who can go in, who are trusted in the community and can talk to people who have experienced an act of violence to help limit the further commission of violence, we're making everyone safer and putting our resources in the right place.
Switching gears just a little bit to pick up a question that Bo here asked in the chat, but is another topic area where you've done a lot of work in your career, and that is consumer protection. Bo wants to talk in particular about how we might change in Virginia the way that governments send people to third-party debt collectors. But for maybe folks who know less about your work in consumer protection and particularly in debt, would love to give you a chance to talk about that and then maybe speak to Bo's question in particular.
Yeah, so when I came to office as Attorney General in the beginning of 2014, consumer protection was not had not been made the priority that I wanted it. So I totally overhauled our consumer protection section and put some real emphasis on predatory lenders in particular. Predatory lending is insidious and it takes advantage of people when they are vulnerable. Some of these companies would charge over 300% interest and load it up with fees and just get people into financial quicksand. And so I have made it a real priority to go after predatory lenders, debt collectors who are using unfair tactics, and really doing everything I can to protect those who are most vulnerable and at risk of it. So we also have gotten some stronger laws, again, thanks to you and your colleagues in the General Assembly under Democratic leadership, and it's making a real difference.
Well, I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of the wonderful consumer protection folks in your office, in particular, Mead Browder, when we were trying to do utility reform this session and bring down the price of Virginian sky-high energy bills. They're wonderful people, truly top-notch experts, and having them side by side and having the force of the Attorney General's office stand up and say, we support this bill because it's obviously a good deal for Virginians really means a lot in terms of the credibility. So I thank you for supporting all of that work.
Yeah, and you know, and Mead and my team and I, we are always fighting to make sure that Virginia consumers do not have to pay one penny more than they should.
Yeah, and it really is a culture change inside of the office. That was not something that was happening before you took hold. Another thing, we got lots of good questions that are kind of jumping around, so forgive me, I'll try to build bridges between them. But we've talked a little bit about your work on for women's rights, in particular on sexual violence. But there's another sort of related topic here, a good question from Rebecca, which is about Virginia's divorce laws. She wants to know if you have any ideas about what we can do about the 1-year waiting period for divorce in Virginia, what you think that means for people who are seeking to end a marriage, and whether that's something we might change.
You know, I think that's something that we can definitely have a conversation about. And you would know as well as I would whether there's any has been any effort along those lines in the General Assembly. But you know, I do think the work that we've done around sexual and domestic violence has really made a huge impact. And one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is what we call lethality assessment protocols. So if it's basically a set of questions that someone who responds to an incident of domestic violence walks through those questions to see if the victim might be at risk of further harm or victimization, and if so, connect them right there immediately to supports in the community to help keep them safe and make sure that they're not further victimized. So I think those are all things that, you know, should be discussed, and that may be something that we might need to change.
I mean, I think there's obviously been a gender violence dimension to the gun laws that we've already had a chance to talk about in I forget quite how many times the extreme risk protection order has been exercised, maybe almost 100 since passed. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, could be.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. The lion's share of them are typically because there's been some kind of incident of domestic violence, because we know how often guns intersect with gun crimes with domestic violence. And so that's been a big part of making people feel more empowered in their homes. And then
and you know, something that a lot of people don't realize is we have a I created a first ever animal law unit. And one of the interesting things that we've found is that there was a need for us to provide training for animal control officers to look for signs of domestic violence or abuse, because there's oftentimes a link. So there could be signs that if somebody is abusing an animal, that they might also be abusive toward the people around them. And then also it is sometimes used as a threat, where if someone cares so much for a pet that an abuser will threaten to remove the animal as a mechanism of control. So there's a lot of good work being done to help those and make sure that people are safe.
I didn't know that. I happened to serve on the animals subcommittee in the General Assembly, so I get all of the bills about cats and dogs and elephants. But I hadn't yet have anyone share that story with me, and it sure makes sense.
Yeah.
So thank you for that work. We have lots of good questions coming in here, and please, folks, if you're watching, keep them coming. We will make sure that we get to yours. One of the questions we have here from Catherine Long, she wants to double back to a conversation we were having about justice reform, because I know that is such a top priority both in this district and across Virginia. We talked a lot about drugs. We talked a little about data sharing and police accountability. Can you talk about other ways in which you would like to see us reduce the impact of policing on Black and Brown communities?
Sure. Well, one thing I want to expand is work that we started back in 2015 to do more implicit bias training to make sure that those biases do not interfere with the judgment and decisions that law enforcement make. And also more 21st century policing skills and de-escalation. That training is really, really important. So I want to see that we expand that. I talked a little bit about the pattern of practice investigations. If there are, if a department has a lot of instances of police brutality or unconstitutional policing, we need to go in and look from the outside and then just look and find out, okay, what is happening in this department that they're having such a high number of instances of unconstitutional policing? What policies, what practices are they doing? And then change them and go to court if we need to. Again, we're not at legalization yet of marijuana, but we need to get there. So there's still more work to be done for sure.
I think one of the questions, I happen to know that Catherine is a nurse. And so I know that one of the things that's being really actively discussed in our community is reducing the scope of the things that we think of as policed incidents, whether someone who is experiencing homelessness and is living on the downtown mall finds themselves interacting with law enforcement, someone having a substance abuse challenge or maybe coping with alcoholism, maybe something as simple as a traffic violation. If those kinds of services could move out from under the scope of law enforcement and into some of the public services, like nursing and first responders who might be in a different position to address them. What do you think about proposals like that?
Yeah, and we absolutely need to look at doing more of that, because by default, law enforcement ends up involved in so many different situations. But if somebody is having a mental health crisis, well, maybe someone with training in mental health should be, there working with the person as opposed to law enforcement. We make law enforcement, do so many things that there might be other professionals that are better suited to working with them.
Yeah, sometimes helping people do their job better can mean asking them to do less because they're being asked to do too much with too little. I can sure understand that. Speaking of a part of our public services that are overstretched, Linda here had a question that goes back to the topic that you were talking with us at the very beginning about your investment in public education as a local county supervisor. This is a little bit maybe outside of the purview of the Attorney General's office, but maybe not, and I imagine still very close to your heart. What do you think that we can be doing to make it easier for our local governments to fund their public schools, given that we do have lots of school boards begging their local government for funds when they are facing overcrowding or having a hard time hiring teachers. I know that a lot of folks who are running statewide right now have made public education funding a top priority. I know that maybe not be the kind of thing that you do in the courtroom so often, but can you talk to us about what you think about that, perhaps rooted in your past experience?
Yeah, well, it's important for people to let their elected officials know what is a priority. And that was something that as a local county official, when I was on the Board of Supervisors, you listen to people, and people wanted good schools. They wanted the kids to have the best education possible. So, we worked to make sure that the schools were funded better. So it's important to make sure that they know it's a priority, and it is for me. We need to make sure that our kids are getting the best education possible, and that takes money and it takes funding. So it's making sure that those voices are being heard by those who are making the decisions.
Well, maybe I can also ask you just a few sort of big picture politics questions, because we are also on the campaign trail. You've talked to us a lot about what you got done in your last 2 terms. Can you talk to us about why you wanted to run for re-election, and when you think about what you would want to say you got done 4 years from now, what are your top priorities for the office in the years ahead?
Well, I wanted to run again because I want to keep the progress going. If you look at the progress we've made over the last 7+ years, it's tremendous, and it's had a huge positive impact on the lives of Virginians. And we want to keep this progress going. So that's why I decided to run. And the vision that I brought in the very beginning, and I talked about this earlier in the show, which was making sure that the powers of the office are on the side of the people, that the Attorney General is the people's lawyer, and that as Attorney General, I'm always looking for ways to use the law to help people, especially those who are vulnerable, those who are marginalized, those who truly need the arm and shield of the law to help and protect them. Looking forward more specifically, I think some of the priorities really fall into 3 buckets: racial justice and policing reform, health, wellness, and well-being, and then also workers' rights. And so the concrete things that I want to accomplish, a lot of them fall within those 3 buckets. I talked a little bit about already the issues around racial justice and policing reform. We need to keep that going. We need to do pattern and practice investigations when departments are engaging in unconstitutional policing. We need to get marijuana legalized. We need to get that and make sure that we deal with past convictions, because that's a matter of fundamental fairness and justice. Something else that I just recently completed, I led the first ever investigation of systemic racial discrimination in a Virginia school system. It was Loudoun County, and we have gotten significant accountability measures now in place to change a lot of policies that were working against Black African American students and Latinx and Hispanic students. So we'll have real accountability measures. And now that I've done that kind of an investigation, I hope other school divisions will take note and begin to make changes so that the same policies that may be in place in their localities change. And I've also, now that I've been able to do that kind of investigation, I also want to think about whether we can apply that in a healthcare setting, because we know that there are disparate impacts on minority communities, people of color, when it comes to health outcomes. And are there policies or systems in place in a large health system, for example, that could be discriminatory, have a discriminatory impact? So that's something else that I'd like to accomplish. And I also talked about the lethality assessment. We've had really good success in reducing other instances of domestic violence by using these protocols, making sure that someone who's a victim gets the services that they need to help keep them safe. but we really should expand it to other communities as well, and which I would like to do. And then in the third category of worker protection, I just announced recently the creation of a worker protection unit that will focus on protecting workers from exploitation, things like wage theft or misclassification. So those are a few of the specific things that I would look forward to if I'm honored and privileged to serve a third term.
Well, as a labor economist, that's work that's definitely near and dear to my heart. And we have done tremendous progress in the last couple of sessions on some of those things to give you some more legal authority to enforce that, both when it comes to wage theft with the recent passage of the Domestic Workers' Rights Act, which will ensure that people who are working in a home, like a nanny or a health aide, can still avail themselves of your office if they're mistreated. The Virginia Values Act, which will obviously provide employment protections for a lot of people too. So it's good that the General Assembly has been a good partner to, I think, empower the state to do enforcement of a lot of those things. So thank you for all of your leadership in that. One of the things that we have a question here from that I think is a good example of what you've been talking about disparities in healthcare, but also connects to our questions about drugs, is your past work on opioid settlements. Because I think that's a great example of a drugs issue that gets treated differently because the users are perceived to be primarily white. And as it was easier, I think, politically for some people to treat that as the healthcare crisis that it is, and that they've been slower to see other forms of addiction and substance use as healthcare crises as well. Would love to give you a chance to talk about your work on opioid settlements and also what you think the future of combating the opioid crisis in Virginia looks like.
So I've really led the charge when it comes to the state's response to the opioid epidemic. And I knew early on this was not a problem that we could arrest our way out of. This was a health issue, and we should approach it that way. A lot of the early work was to sound the alarm, to let people know this is a real crisis, and to also try to break down the stigma associated with addiction and to help inform people about how this crisis got started in the first place. It really has its roots in the medicine cabinets across America, and that goes directly back to the boardrooms and the marketing offices of the pharmaceutical companies. And so a lot of the work over the last few years has also been about holding those who are responsible for creating and prolonging this epidemic and holding them accountable. So we have been investigating pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors, and we have uncovered a lot of evidence of how they knew their drugs were dangerous, and they totally misled the public and made them think they were not as addictive as they were. And so we have sued Purdue Pharma, we have sued Teva, we sued the Sackler family, we've been investigating other companies. And this past legislative session, I worked with the General Assembly to establish a opioid abatement authority. And what this authority would do is receive money that I'm able to bring back to Virginia, either by court judgment or a settlement. And that money would then go out into the communities for treatment and to help with treatment and prevention across the state, which is really, really important to do. We got the first case, which was against a marketing company, because they were doing marketing consulting for Purdue Pharma and just creating schemes to push more pills and more pills and more pills, knowing how addictive these were. And so we got almost $600 million total. Virginia's share is about 13 million. So that's the first settlement that we've been able to get. But there are more on the horizon. As I said, Purdue Pharma and the distributors, other manufacturers. So now there's a mechanism set up where that money can come into Virginia and then go to helping people who really need it the most.
You know, you reminded me another sphere of policy where there's, I think, a lot of scope for the state to protect Virginians and their health, is the environment, and particularly from the threats of corporate pollution. We've had some recent examples of companies that have been misleading the public. When I think about the Volkswagen settlement in emissions fraud, and some of that money that will now be coming to Virginians that we'll be putting into charging infrastructure for electric vehicles to help hasten the transition there and reduce carbon emissions. This is a district that cares an awful lot about a clean and safe and healthy planet. Can you talk to us about the role of the Attorney General's office in environmental issues?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, because whether it's a consumer-related issue that has impacts on climate change, whether it was suing the Trump administration over rolling back the clean car standards, or suing the administration over its failure to abide by the Chesapeake Bay cleanup plan, being an aggressive protector of our environment has been a top priority of mine. And so we do it in a lot of different ways. We do it, again, it could be a consumer kind of case like the Volkswagen case was, or it could be, now, thankfully, we won't have to sue the Trump administration, because we have a Biden administration that takes climate change seriously and is moving us back into the right direction. And it'll be nice, again, to have a partner to work with. So we'll see what happens with the case that we have against the EPA now involving the Chesapeake Bay. And hopefully that's one where the administration will agree that the Trump administration was taking us in the wrong direction and reverse course. So there's a lot there. And as Attorney General, I'm going to continue to fight to protect our environment.
I want to thank everybody for the questions that are coming in from the chat. The range of topics that we're covering is fantastic, and I think it's a mark of the range of the work that the Attorney General's office does. We've got about 10 minutes left, so if you have a burning question, now is the time to ask it. We have a great one here from Tia, who I think is building in part on the work that you mentioned that's a priority for you about workers' rights, but talking about workers really in the moment here. Can you talk about how your office has responded to challenges faced by workers during COVID-19? Perhaps particularly those who may have felt unsafe going to work or threatened or coerced by their employer?
Yeah. So we are at this point, and last week there was a lot of reflection because it had been 1 year of the pandemic. So many families have suffered with illness, suffered loss, suffered economically because of the economic fallout from the pandemic. So many people were laid off or lost their jobs, especially hourly workers. And so it is worth taking a little bit of time to just reflect on that. And we still have a long way to go to get through and recover from the pandemic. As Attorney General, I helped guide the state through the first year of it. We had initially a lot of cases of allegations of price gouging. We went in and got a court order to halt evictions or in order to stop service cutoffs of utilities, work to stop evictions. And so there's a lot of that sort of safety net kind of work in the beginning. And then there was also the need to help protect workers because maybe some employers were not using the safety measures that they should have been. There were poultry plants on the Eastern Shore, for example, that we sent letters to demanding that they comply with better safety precautions. So there's really there was a lot of work there to be done to help protect workers, and workers need to know that I'm here to help them, so that if they need my help on something, we're here to help.
Well, I'm sure they're glad to hear that. We have another question here that is COVID related, particularly to the economic shutdown from Fred that you touched on briefly, about what can be done to protect people from eviction once the federal COVID protections expire. What does that look like in the near term?
Well, I think there's the law the Protection Act that was just passed by Congress is going to really be a big help for people. They're going to get the $1,400 checks. There's additional funding for unemployment, and also I think there's funding for to help prevent evictions. So there's a lot there that the Biden administration put together and that the Democratic Congress was able to get passed that is going to help Americans to get through this last part of the pandemic and re-energize our economy.
And Fred, I think part of that work falls to me and my colleagues in the General Assembly. What we will start doing next week is reviewing the funding that we have been sent from the federal government and how we're going to spend some of that urgent state and local relief. And I do think it would be prudent for us to, in Richmond, pour more money into our rent and mortgage relief program so that we can make sure that everybody is staying safe in their home, because everything that we've talked about, whether it is health or education, follows from having safe housing. And so would love to see that be among the priorities of what we do with that federal funding. We have another healthcare question related here. People seem to take me up on my offer to ask a last minute one. This one from Madison, something we haven't touched on yet, but I know is very important, about what we want to do about reproductive health care in your next term as Attorney General. What would be your priorities for abortion access and also for contraception access in another term?
Well, I support women's rights and reproductive rights. It is a healthcare issue. It is an economic issue, and I trust women to make their own healthcare decisions. So what I will do is continue to work with our General Assembly partners and make sure that those rights are protected. If anyone tries to take them away, I will be there to fight against that and make sure that those rights are protected.
Well, it's all the more important that we have good partners at the state level to do that. As the Supreme Court looks less and less friendly toward reproductive care, we're going to have to be putting that up. And I think in Virginia, we're getting used to the idea that we may have to be a safe haven for others, that we've gone from a place where that was hostile to reproductive rights to really being a regional leader that may have to support our neighbors.
Right. And so I have gone to court multiple times to protect Planned Parenthood from getting defunded, gone to court to defend reproductive rights, and women in Virginia can count on me to continue to do that.
Well, sir, thank you so much for your time tonight. We are coming up against the top of the hour. With the time that we have left, I would love to give you a chance to talk about how people can help with the campaign. If they're excited about keeping you in office for another 4 years, what's the best way for them to lend a hand?
Well, thanks so much. And again, to everyone, I want to thank you for your help and support over the years. And I am asking again for your support as Attorney General to be the people's lawyer. And the best way to stay involved is you can go to our website, Herring4, F-O-R-A-G, and sign up for our electronic, email newsletter. Follow me on whatever, follow the campaign on whatever your favorite social media platform is. And I look forward to seeing you all on the campaign trail.
Well, sir, thank you so much for your time tonight, for all of your work. We'll look forward to continuing to work with you in the year ahead.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Good night.
Take care.